Hi everyone. This week's module we're going to start looking at two specific areas that require a lot of attention and actually can create some of the largest stressors in project management as a whole. So the first is actually looking at how to meet client expectations. Managing expectations is one of the largest areas of concern really in any type of project you take on, because even if the project is going well from your perspective as a project manager, if the client has higher expectations than what you're delivering on, you're not doing a good job. I mean, that's the perception and the reality in terms of the client. So one of the things you have to be very clear on from the very beginning is what those client expectations are. Now, you set a lot of those in the beginning when you start bringing in bids, setting down actual budget expectations. If you say we're going to spend 20 grand on mulch, then one of the things that that client's going to expect is that you're just going to spend 20 grand on mulch. If you say that the mulch will be laid by day 3 and by day 8 the project is completely over and by day 3 you haven't even finished the dirt work, you're in trouble. Now, even if you run into project delays, and you always run into project delays because the reality is that things never go as expected. It's never as smooth as you expect. It never goes according to plan, or very rarely goes according to plan. So one of the things you have to realize is that part of being a project manager is being a problem solver. And we spend a lot of time solving problems. And we have contingency plans for the problems that we feel there is a likelihood will occur. And we spend time really detailing who has the authority to make decisions and when they can make those decisions and the relationships between the people involved in the process and the project and the actual work that gets done. And your book calls that a relationship matrix, I believe. So what we really start to do is see how we define all these things in the beginning and how we set the expectations of how things are going to be done. If you know, let's say you're a week into a 4-week project and you know at the end of that week that a lot of the estimations in the budget are no longer correct and the timeline is already skewed, and maybe it's because of a natural issue like a weather situation that you have no control over, but you don't wait for 3 more weeks to have the conversation with the client that we're going to need one more money in more time, 2 more time, because by the time you have that conversation, all you're going to get is frustration and anger. So part of your job as a project manager is to manage those client expectations, understand clearly what they are, keep in touch with the client on a regular basis, communicating where the project is, never delay the hard conversations because that is human nature, right? I don't want to have the conversation with them that we found this issue and it's putting the project over. I don't know if any of you ever watch on HGTV Love It or List It, but it's a show where you've got a realtor and you've got an interior designer and you've got a couple who's completely split on what they want to do. One is adamant that they stay in the house they're currently in, and the other is adamant that they move because they've had it with the house. And so what they do is they bring in this interior designer to get you to love your house, and you have to give them the budget to fix the issues. And then you give a budget for a new house to the real estate agent, and in the end you see where you come out. Are you going to love it or are you going to list it? And I would highly recommend you watch this show at least a couple of times while you're taking this class, because it really does give you a good idea about project management. Because one of the things that they run into all the time is even when they get a very healthy budget from a homeowner, $75,000 to redo all of these interior spaces in their home, the minute you start doing construction work and you start taking things off, taking down drywall, opening walls, checking electrical, just last night, one of the things that happened is that they took all the drywall off in the basement to actually start the process of building in and finishing the basement. They found that they had a colony of hundreds of mice that had eaten through the electrical in the entire house, and it was a major fire hazard. Well, that was about a third of the budget gone in one swoop, right? And that kind of stuff comes up all the time. And so then you have to manage that client expectation of, we have to take the kitchen off the list because we have to spend 20 grand on electrical for the house. And yes, you never see that electrical, but now you don't have a fire, but every time you walk in the house, you now see you don't have the kitchen you wanted, right? Project nightmare. But one of the things you have to do is have that hard conversation with that client and go, I can give you everything I originally promised if you can give me more money, but this is the time it's going to add on. We can fix what we found and have to fix using this amount of the budget and stay on time. And so you have to manage for them what direction they want to go and clearly understand. So that's just one example, but I think that it's a really good one, and it's relevant and helps you understand how managing these different phases of a project becomes so challenging, and managing client expectations are also a challenge, because it's not just, oh, you're a horrible project manager because you won't come in on time and on budget. Depending on what kind of project it is, you can uncover hidden costs you were not aware of that affect both. Where the line is drawn on whether you succeed or fail as you move forward in that project is how you handle the client expectation with what's happening with the budget and the timeline. So keep that in mind, right? So this chapter really starts talking to you about managing those expectations, having those conversations, understanding how you communicate with the client, that you bring them in on the successes, just like you have conversations with them when things don't go well. When you hit the milestones you have set down in the project, let them know and let them celebrate with you, right? And milestones are so important. Those deadlines are crucial. But if you are lackadaisical about it in the beginning, then none of your project crew is ever going to really believe you mean them, which means that when you get to the end, you're in a very bad position. Okay, so the next chapter we're going to look at has to do with working with people. Now, everybody that's watching this has had to work with people. If you haven't had a job, then you definitely had to work with people within the environment you've been in, school being one of them. And one of the things that we run into and have problems with is that people can be difficult to get along with. Personality types can vary so much. It's not that the different individuals are bad people, it's that their personalities clash to a certain degree, and so they have more challenges when they're forced or end up in a situation where they have to work together. Understanding those different personality types can provide you with such ease in understanding why you don't necessarily get along and how you might need to talk to each other in order to get past just the basic barriers because of personality that exist. So it's important that as you move into actual management of projects, or you start looking at having to deal with people, that you start really understanding that conflicts occur, and conflicts aren't fighting. Personality conflicts occur. And one of the things that as a leader of a project you have to do is be able to manage those personalities well, talk to anyone regardless of personality style, often adapt your leadership style based on what those particular personalities need from you. And it can be something as simple as the types of instructions you give. You may have one person that works for you that has a personality that requires you to build the instructions up. A, B, C, D. You have to give them in a train of thought. You have to provide it to them in a very linear, logical, step-by-step manner. They have to start with the small pieces. And then you'll have people that work for you that have a personality that they like to see the big picture. And if you tell them the end result, they can filter it back to all the steps and get it done. And they don't need to be micromanaged. They need to be left alone. They'll get the work done. If it's the other person who needs the step-by-step instructions, they probably need a certain level of micromanagement because you've got to be with them each step of that way, or you lose them. Now, this can be challenging in a project. I'll just say that up front. For me, I am a manager. I am not a micromanager. I'm so far from it. When I come in, I like to give you big picture. This is what I need done. This is the date you have to have it done in. If you have problems, questions, let's talk as we go. I'll check in. You check in with me. Otherwise, if you're not bringing me issues, I'm trusting you to get it done and get it to me on this deadline. Sometimes I have employees that need the total opposite, and I don't like to manage that way. I do not want to be standing over someone's shoulder. It's not my style. When I'm in a management position where there are many people and some people need that, I can certainly step into that role. But if I have my preference, It is not what I would get into. And when you're talking projects, events, I will tell you right now, it's much more challenging for me to deal with someone who needs those step-by-step, micromanager, piece by piece, because a project is large many times. And it needs people who can say, I know what the end result needs to be, and I can be proactive in taking the steps to get us there. And that can lead to some issues too, right? Because sometimes those proactive steps may not be what you wanted done. So there's a give and take there on both sides. You should know yourself well enough to know which of those types of, and that's a management style, not a leadership style, but which type of manager you tend to be, right? Whether you tend to go with McGregor's theory Y attitude, that employees want to be there and that they will do their best and they will put their best foot forward, or whether you have a theory X um, perspective on employees, that they don't want to be there, and if you're not standing over there, they won't get the work done, right? So McGregor gave us that theory of theory Y, theory X, employee types, right, our perspective. What you usually find is micromanagers very much have a theory X perspective on employees. They don't want to be here, they hate being here. If I'm not watching them every minute, they won't do the work. And managers that don't like to micromanage and don't believe in it and instead think employees are going to take the initiative and get it done and hit their deadlines and be excited about doing it have more of a theory Y perspective, and that's kind of where I come from. I have much more of a theory Y perspective on employees, that they want to do the work and they want to do the best job they possibly can. I have that perspective on students, right? That why would you be taking the class if you didn't want to? Except for just degree requirement issues, but why would you be going after the degree if you didn't want it? Why would you really put yourself through college, the expense, the time, if you didn't want to learn, right? And if I give you the deadlines and I give you the tools and I give you the guidance, you're going to dig in and learn because that's what you're here for, right? It's a totally different attitude than having an attitude you really don't want to be here and I have to force you to do every little thing. So think about yourself. You know, where do you fall on that? How do you really think of people that work for you? How do you think of employees? As an employee, what do you fall into? So think about these things as you go through and read the chapter, and you look at working in teams and working with people and different personality types. And one of the things that Mrs. Hayes up in the accounting department will often say to students who come in complaining about a certain teacher, whoever it might be, is that the faculty across the campus are a good representation of all the different types of personalities you may end up with as a boss. And you're not going to get along with all of them, right? But here's where the kicker comes in. Can you work with them whether you like them or not, and whether your personalities mesh well or not, right? Because I'm going to tell you now, you're going to have bosses across your career that you don't enjoy being around. And just because your personalities clash doesn't mean you can't have respect for their abilities. And that comes through when you're talking about working with people, right? Body language shows it, the way in which you talk to people, you communicate with them in email. So all of this is so vital to project management. Communication is a process, and you have to have a communication kind of schedule and a communication idea in line. You have to be able to deal with different personalities, both from the client perspective and the employee perspective. You need to know yourself well and know what kind of challenges you might have as a manager or leader. So as you read the chapter, you watch the videos in this chapter, and you start working through the discussion question, I just want you to keep these things in mind and do some self-reflection, because honestly, learning is about stretching your capabilities, right? Most of these classes aren't easy. Well, if they're not easy, they're stretching you. If they're stretching you, you're learning. And that's part of our job, is to get you to stretch past what you already know and engage in the material and learn something from it. It's never necessarily, it's kind of like growing pains, right? Those were never pleasant as a child. The same thing about learning is that it's many times not that pleasant because it makes you move in a different way. Well, when you're dealing with projects, every project has new challenges that come with it, which stretch you and have you grow. Now, most project managers have a very strong understanding of their own ability to deal with problems. And in fact, if you're a good project manager or you've managed many projects, one of the things you know is that you can handle crisis, you can handle changes to budget, changes to schedule, Those types of things are things you're used to juggling with. And so because you're used to juggling them, they don't stress you, right? So then it comes down to how good are you communicating with them. This is just an overview of what we're doing. So do some self-reflection as you work through the material this week, and I look forward to hearing you in the discussion boards.